Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all protocols duly observed. It is my pleasure to welcome you here this morning. I look across the room and I see people from across the different sectors of our society, representatives of government, leaders of organized private sector, colleagues from civil society, representatives of our multilateral partners, and all esteemed guests, both those who are here in the room and those who are joining online. On behalf of Agora Policy, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this stakeholder dialogue on sustaining and deepening economic reforms in Nigeria. This event is organized with the support of the Nigeria Economic Stability and Transformation Program, an initiative designed to support economic growth and transformation in our nation, and also with the support of FCDU. We are gathered here to deliberate on how to sustain, deepen, and improve current economic reforms while laying a stronger foundation for future ones. Such deliberations are not just formal exercises, they are necessary stock-taking to ensure that reforms are inclusive, their benefits are well distributed, and their pains are minimized, so that public trust is sustained and socioeconomic growth is inclusive. Why is this event an imperative? Serious reforms are ongoing across the economic sector, and invariably, change is constant. Economic policy must never be a one-off event. It should be a constant conversation between those who design reforms, those who implement them, and those who are impacted by them. We must regularly touch base to ask, how is it going? Where can we improve or be better? And what do we need to do more of or less of? Today, I want to congratulate all of you in the room. When I say the room, I mean both here and online, and the sectors you represent, as this is a veritable example of deepening democracy in action. Governance is dual-sided. There's a demand side and there's a supply side, and both must go hand in hand. And the cross-section of our society here present means Agora Policy is achieving one of its raison d'etre, the reason for its being. Agora Policy is a space for such democratic dialogues to happen in a safe space, for strategies and aspirations of governance to be interrogated, to be refined, and to be steered for a better and improved end. At Agora Policy, our primary objective is to provide a dedicated space for the interrogation of policy issues and to bring clarity to policy directions. Our work under this current program is broken into three critical pillars. One is research, conducting independent study on the impact of economic reforms. I'm sure you've seen some of our publications, which we are very proud of. Please, if you haven't had one before, make sure you take one with you as you are going. Two is convening, hosting this stakeholder dialogue to facilitate frank and constructive discussion. And third is actionable policy, generating specific policy products from these findings to provide a roadmap for future reforms. Without our partners, we cannot do what we do. I wish to express our deep gratitude to our sponsors, NEST and FCDU, for their vital support. We also thank our partner, the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, for their collaboration in bringing this event to life. Our panel today is the heart of this event, representing a cross-sector of society, the central bank discussing monetary policy, the special advisor to the president on the economy and finance, on fiscal policy, the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, private sector, Civil society providing citizens' perspective, World Bank offering a multilateral institutional perspective. I specifically encourage the representatives here from business and from civil society for frank conversation about the direction, the progress, and the challenges of the reforms. The reception in a space like this is excellent for getting your views across. We seek your innovative ideas and frank feedback to ensure that the gains of the reforms are felt by all segments of society. Thank you to our panel of experts and specialists. Your contributions to building Nigeria will not be in vain. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being part of this essential conversation. We are honored to have an able anchor in whose capable hands I leave you. I wish you all fruitful deliberations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to our board chair. Up next, we start off with our goodwill messages. I want to give a warm welcome to Mr. Mahesh Misra, who of course is a member of the Economic Council of the British High Commission.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to this event organized jointly by Agora Policy Group, the Nigeria Economic Summit Group, and Tetra Tech, who are the implementing partner for one of our economic technical assistance programs supported by the UK government. I think it's good to see an event like this, which is bringing together multiple stakeholders, people, individuals who have got stake in the country's economic reform policy and program, bringing them all together so that the way ahead and economic policy going forward is informed by multiple stakeholders and their views and not driven by a single or narrowly focused thought process. As Ms. Ozobe said, economic reform is not a one-off event. It's a kind of sustained effort which is over decades. Many countries have made attempts at making or reforming economic policy. Very few have been successful. And those who have been successful are the ones who have been able to sustain, broaden, and deepen the economic reform process over a number of years, maybe a number of decades. It is pretty much a continuous process. It's a bit like entrepreneurship. You have to keep improving. You have to keep improvising. And in doing that, you need to carry the multiple stakeholders that you have who are impacted, who are benefited by the policy along with you. And events like this are very, very important part of that process. I think it has been very, very encouraging to see Nigeria embarking on a pathway of economic reform from 2023. I would like to say that it has been quite a courageous effort and courageous journey, which has so far involved very, very difficult and tough economic choices. And economic choices which have impact on millions of Nigerians, lives of millions of Nigerians, with some very harsh short-term cost. And it's not easy for any government to embark in a policy process like this, which is going to have immediate short-term cost, but with long-term benefits. And it's really gratifying to see that the difficult choices that were made 2 years back have started yielding concrete economic benefits in terms of raised economic growth, inflation coming down, although they still remain at a high level. And that tells you how difficult some of these policy challenges were, that they are stubborn, they're not going. and they're asking for more efforts to be made to remove them. Naira is now a very competitive currency, and all of this is helping the country's private sector to position themselves as a competitive player in the global market with some immediate impact. And if this is sustained over a long period of time, I am sure that that is going to yield substantial economic benefits for the economy and the citizens of Nigeria. And we, the UK government, have been a proud supporter of the Nigeria government's economic policy program. The UK government and government of Nigeria enjoy a very deep relationship, a relationship which is anchored in the strategic economic partnership that was signed by our two governments back in November 2024. And it's also anchored in the enhanced trade and investment partnership, which is pretty much the soul of this partnership. And it's gratifying to see that we are going to have a state visit next week, which signifies the depth and breadth of relationship between our two countries. And within that partnership, support for economic reform program in Nigeria is a substantial part. And we try to bring together multiple instruments in order to be able to provide substantive support to government of Nigeria in pursuing and continuing on this reform path. And the multiple tools that we are making use of, consist of the overseas development assistance, which is funding program like the Nigeria Economic Stability and Transformation Program, and also the Nigeria Public Policy, Fiscal Policy Program, and also a recently launched UK-Nigeria Growth Program, which is getting into tendering process as we speak. And it doesn't just stop there. It is only a small part. ODA is a small part of a bigger story. It's not going to be able to, with a small pot of money, you're not going to be able to make a big difference or make the needle move in a significant way. And that needs to be supplemented with a number of other tools. And we are glad that we are able to bring into play tools like UK-backed financial institutions such as the British International Investment, the UK Export Finance Agency. There are also a number of Nigerian companies now listing on London Stock Exchange to have access to international capital that they need to expand their business here in Nigeria. The City of London is also an important part of this story in terms of providing Nigerian private sector have access to international capital. And our effort is in trying to bring all of this strength together to make a bigger impact. It's good to see that you are going to be having a substantive discussion over the next 3 hours or so on what lies ahead of Nigeria in terms of economic reform policy, what is going to make sense, what is not going to make sense, and how Nigeria can deepen and broaden the economic reform process. You've got a very powerful a panel discussion, subsequently, which is consisting of some authoritative voices in this field, and I'll be really looking forward to hearing about the outcome from this discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mizra. Up next, our next Goodwill message is from Mr. Henry Adigun, who is with the NEST, the Nigerian Economic Stability and Transformation. A warm round of applause for him, please.
Good morning, everybody. Let me say thank you for attending this program. I think we want to deepen that dialogue and get the people's voices into the room around the reforms we are undertaking. You've heard from the funding partner, High Commission, their interest. Our NEST is a very small program, but we have very high ambitions. And our way of working is to work with both the government, the private sector, and civil society to improve that quality of reforms and transforms to Nigerians. You know, people say the reforms have been going on, but people want to feel it. How does it impact my life? How can I improve the quality of my life? So it's high level to say, well, yeah, currency is getting better, inflation is getting better. But until the point where people start feeling it in their everyday spending, in their living, then we've succeeded. So NEST is here to support that kind of advance. September last year. So this is the first dialogue we're having. We have to open to have more partners. So thank you for coming. I enjoy discussions. Let's make it as open as possible. And I thank Agora Policy and NASG. And of course, I thank FCDO. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Adigo. And that's NEST. So I saw NESG and NEST, so I kept saying that. So it's NEST, the Nigerian Economic Stability and Transformation. Thank you so much. It's time for our presentation now. And I want to call on Professor Shuaibu, Dr. Mohammed Shuaibu, who is with the Department of Economics at the University of Abuja, to put forward this presentation from the Agora Council on Agora Policy on the impacts of reform. So one round of applause for him, please. Yes.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm here to share with you the findings from an analysis we conducted on the impact of ongoing macroeconomic reforms in Nigeria. And the outline for the presentation is pretty straightforward. We have the background, the model, the qualitative analysis, and the policy recommendations. So we start off with the basic trends in terms of the issues, the data, the evidence in terms of what had happened immediately after the introduction of these major reforms. And three of these major reforms include the PMS subsidy removal, the electricity tariff hike, and then the floating of the naira. And these have had, direct and immediate impacts on different economic indicators. The first and obvious one being the increase in PMS price, as we can see in the chart on the extreme left. And then, of course, the floating of the naira also led to a significant spike in the naira-dollar exchange rate. And then, of course, we saw a significant increase in Band A tariff to about 210 naira per kilowatt per hour. These reforms, of course, have had a significant impact on key macroeconomic indicators. We've seen an improvement in gross external reserves. We've seen an improvement in FAC allocation as well as debt servicing. But then on the flip side, we've also seen that it has led to an increase in the cost of living and has also eroded welfare and affected operational decisions of firms. As we can see here, the average cost of healthy diet has increased more than doubled from 515 naira to 1,611. We've also seen an increase in the average cost of intercity transportation, and the average price of rent has also gone up significantly, while the cost of a healthy diet in terms of nutritional intake has, taken an upward trend, throughout the review period that is being considered. Of course, the government did not just sit down and fold its arm. It took several measures to help, cushion these shocks. The first most important one being the increase in minimum wage. And after that, we also saw conditional cash transfer programs that were launched in October 2023. But again, there was a delay in the implementation, which of course had a lead because it didn't start until late 2024. So basically, this sort of missed a critical window in terms of when households actually needed this relief. Of course, we saw the conditional cash transfer of 75,000 naira, which was also insufficient to sort of cushion the impact of the shock. And then, of course, there were several food security initiatives as well, ranging from beefing up security around agricultural activities, all-year irrigation systems to boost farming and improve storage and bad roads and whatnot. So beyond the evidence, what we did was to use two approaches to assess some of these reforms. The first is the quantitative analysis, and here we use a dynamic computable general equilibrium model to test the impact of PMS subsidy removal as well as electricity price tariffs. And of course, here we looked at the impact on several macroeconomic indicators, and then we also looked at the distributional impacts by moving from the macro to the micro impact. And then, of course, we complemented the quantitative analysis with qualitative analysis through the use of focus group discussion, where we accounted for a diverse number of stakeholders to provide critical contextual insights into how household consumption decisions, as well as firm or business operational decisions, have been impacted by these various reforms. So we start off with the model in terms of what we did. As I said earlier, we used a standard PEP1T dynamic general equilibrium model that is recursive to account for both the supply and demand side impact of various reforms. What did we test? So the analysis was predicated on four policy scenarios. The first one is the removal of the PMS subsidy. But then we also accounted for the removal. We complemented this removal with the cash transfers to the most vulnerable groups. And then the third scenario was the removal of electricity tariffs alone. And then we also combined it with cash transfers as well. So the idea was to look at how these reforms or these policy shocks would affect the dynamic path of key macroeconomic indicators as well as micro indicators as well. Now, on the other side, we also, so in terms of the data, we used the 2018, which is the most recent data available for modeling using the CGE model. We used the 2018 social accounting matrix, which is a provides a representative snapshot of the Nigerian economy. It captures intersectoral linkages as well as the relationship or the circular flow of income between different economic agents within the economy and with the rest of the world. So in terms of the results, the first finding is we looked at this. So if you look at the rows, you would see the first row looks at the reform-only scenario in terms of the impact, and then the second one looks at the reform, the PMS subsidy removal combined with the social protection or social transfers. So we would see that the impact on prices, the initial impact on prices is 2.6%, but then when combined with social transfers, we saw that the social transfers sort of had an inflationary impact. The effect on firm investment or how businesses spend was negative, 2.4%, and even worsened with social transfers, while firm income had a positive impact in both scenarios and was slightly higher when the scenario was combined with social protection. So in terms of government saving, we saw a very huge drop in government savings. But again, this is very indicative because we're still looking at this again. And then, of course, if you look at government investment, we also saw a significant increase in it. But then we see a contraction in real GDP from 1.3% for the PMS removal scenario alone. But when combined with social protection, we see a decline. Again, that's the reason for some of this could be traced to, the decline we saw in firm investment as well as the increase in prices. So here we look at the, sort of the trend, the impact, the dynamic path impact of the PMS subsidy removal on household consumption. And we look at this in the context of the impact on high-income rural households, low-income rural households, middle-income rural households, as well as low-income urban households. The impact of the scenario, so the blue bars represent the PMS subsidy removal scenarios, while the gray bars represent the PMS subsidy removal combined with the PMS subsidy removal. And we can see that consumption sort of declined over time for high-income households. For middle-income households, it even becomes negative after the third year, which is starting from 2025. While for, excuse me, for low-income rural households, we could see that the impact on consumption was high, but then it was moderated by the social transfers, and the same applies to low-income urban households as well. Okay, so the micro, in terms of the micro impact of the PMS subsidy removal, here we sort of moved from the macro results to the micro results. And here we see that the poverty headcount worsened, after the subsidy removal. From the baseline of 50%, it increased to 63%. But we see that it remains 63% even when social protection was introduced. So this means that the social protection programs might not have, the delays in the social protection, or the quantum was not enough to sort of mitigate the effect on poverty. Excuse me. But again, we see that for high-income households, they're sort of insulated from the results. And then, of course, from the national perspective, we see a worsening of the poverty indicator to 63.3%, but then it's moderated to 56.2% when social transfers were introduced. We also have similar numbers for the poverty gap and severity of poverty, but what is more striking here is that the effect on high-income households is neutral across board. So here we look at now the electricity tariff removal in terms of what happened. Here, as we can see, the impact on consumer prices was 0.26%, but then when social protection was introduced, it improves marginally by 0.52%. Firm investment is also positive across board before and after, but it drops a little bit when social protection was introduced. Again here, if we look at the impact on real GDP, it's 0.42 for the electricity tariff hike alone scenario, but sort of comes down a bit to 0.21. Please note that these are just the average prices over the period that we considered. So here again, we look at the impact, the dynamic impact on household consumption over time, starting from 2023 to 2027. We see the cascading of the high-income rural households in terms of its impact from the blue bars. And then we see that the social transfers were quite effective in terms of, mitigating the impact on consumption of households, high-income households, as well as low-income households and low-income urban households. So social transfers were actually effective here in dampening the impact of electricity reforms. Again, this is quite obvious because only the Band A households experience the electricity tariff hikes, but then the impact on the other household groups could be due to the trickle-down effect or sort of multiplier effect of that. Here we look at the effects of the electricity tariff removal on poverty. Again, we see that for the headcount, if you look at the headcount we saw an increment after the subsidy removal, and even with the introduction of the social transfers, we didn't see any change. The same applied to high-income households, which, as expected, is relatively lower, and for national income and for the national poverty headcount as well. So what are the key takeaways from the numbers? First, we see that PMS subsidies sort of pushed up average prices with, inflationary impacts being amplified by social transfers. And of course, we see a contraction in real GDP under the PMS subsidy removal, but an increase following the electricity tariff reform. And then, of course, in terms of household consumption, we see that for all the groups, for all the segments that we have considered, consumption declined after both scenarios, but social transfers sort of cushioned the impact, especially for the low-income households. In terms of firms, firm investments and income moved in opposite direction. Fuel subsidy removal sort of reduced firm-level investment while increasing its income, while electricity tariffs had the reverse impact. So poverty increased, as we saw, but with limited relief from the delay in deploying the transfers. National poverty numbers increased following both the PMS and electricity tariff reforms, and social transfers sort of offered, marginal reductions in poverty headcount, but there was little or no impact in terms of what was happening to high-income households. So the other side of the analysis is the qualitative bit, where we focused on people, engaged with people to hear what was really going on. And here we looked at focus group discussion across the 6 geopolitical zones, just to examine how households and firms have experienced, interpreted, and adjusted to some of these reforms. So here we used the purposive stratified sampling, and of course 12 FGDs were considered, 2 sessions for 1 state across the 6 geopolitical zones. Of course, we considered both the demand side and the supply side in terms of households as well as businesses. And of course, there was the sample was well covered in terms of at least 50% were covered by women and youth. And of course, basically this was to account for heterogeneity. And how did we do it? We used semi-structured protocol, and data was analyzed based on thematic analysis. Excuse me. So basically, these are the 5 themes that we considered. And the first one, in terms of the impact on households, is that what households said was that they acknowledged that the reforms were inevitable and required, given the prevailing economic circumstance, but they felt that they were blindsided by the abruptness of the policy announcement. In terms of the immediate impact of the reforms, it sort of eroded the purchasing power of households across different groups that were considered. In terms of the distributional impacts, it had a disproportionate impact on especially the most vulnerable groups: children, women, retirees, and residents in rural communities. So we also looked at the coping and adjustment mechanism, and here households adapted to shocks, not through recovery, but through sacrifice. They started commuting by foot. They ate less. They moved from 111 to 001, or stuff like that. So they, managing, cutting electricity use, borrowing, depleting savings, and stuff like that. So the last one, thematic area, is government and non-state responses. And here, households reported little or no meaningful support that is coming from the government side. Now, in terms of business, along the same thematic areas, businesses, in terms of awareness and understanding, businesses also accepted the fundamentals or the driving factors behind all of these reforms. But of course, they made a case that the reforms should have been adopted, using a more gradual approach rather than the sudden implementation. In terms of the immediate impact, of course, businesses said, increase their operational costs, pushing many businesses to sort of downsize as transaction cost or operational cost increased. Some had to downsize by laying off workers, or they had to relocate or shut down completely. So businesses coped also by raising prices, downsizing, and switching towards alternative energy sources. In terms of state or government support from the government, businesses, of course, said they received no meaningful support. with promises widely seen as unfulfilled or insufficient. So again, the key recommendations, 4 key recommendations come out from this study that we have done. The first one has to do with sequencing the reforms gradually, not simultaneously. This means that future reforms should be sort of phased rather than phased and also predicated on very rigorous empirical assessments. And again, the idea is to give people time to adjust and to build up resilience towards the potential negative impacts of the reforms. The second one is to build and reform the social protection system. This has to do around redesigning, scaling up the program, building up confidence in the National Social Register, and ensuring, of course, timely deployment of some of these funds to most vulnerable groups who need them the most. The third one is targeted relief to sensitive sectors or very, very critical sectors, such as those related to food, logistics, transportation. Of course, this would help stabilize prices in those sectors where critical items that households consume are required. So the last one has to do with the reform of government's communication approach of this reform. So it's not enough to just embark on these reforms, but rather communicating reforms is key. Rebuilding trust as social capital, providing opportunity for empathetic and continuous dialogue, I think would be very, very helpful. Of course, acknowledging that, the reforms are not as easy as they seem, but, efforts are being made to sort of address these reforms. So thank you very much, and we look forward to your comments and attention.
Round of applause again, please, to Dr. Shoaibu for that presentation. Set the scene for us pretty well. I do want to recognize a few more people before we get to our panel session. Mr. Chris Okeke of the FCDO, Ms. Yetunde Adegoke of NEST, Ms. Aishatu Abdullahi of NEST, Professor Remi Ayede of the University of Ibadan, Professor Jalamatu Issa of ABU, Professor Damilola Agbalajobi of OAU, Dr. Henry Asogwa of UNN, Mr. Oluseun Onigbinde of Budget, Mr. Eze Onyekwere of the CSJ. Now, this is what you've been waiting for. So we're going to get into our panel now, where we're going to discuss the why of the reforms, the impact of the reforms, and what is coming up next. So let me introduce our panelists, one after the other, just giving you a bio on each of them. We'll start with monetary policy. I'm also going to take questions from you as well. So questions on exchange rates, interest rates, and so on. Dr. Mohamed Sani Abdullahi, Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, is an economist and public policy expert with over 2 decades of leadership in economic policy, central banking, and international development. As Deputy Governor of Economic Policy at the Central Bank of Nigeria, he provides strategic insight of macroeconomic, monetary policy, and financial markets, holds a BSc and MSc in economics from Ahmadu Bello University of University Zaria, MSc in development economics and policy from the University of Manchester, and a PhD from the University of Reading. He's a member of the Dunning Africa Center and author of Disruption, Rethinking Governance to Work for the Poor. You're welcome, sir. Come on up. So that's on the monetary policy side. Now we move to the fiscal side. Mrs. Sayede Okoli, Special Advisor to the President on Finance and the Economy. Prior to her current position, Ms. Okoli had more than 30 years of experience in financial advisory, corporate finance, and auditing. Among others, was the CEO of Alpha African Advisory Limited, holds an MA in Mechanical Engineering from Cambridge University, UK, and trained as a chartered accountant with Arthur Andersen. She's also a fellow of the 5th class of the African Leadership Initiative West Africa, and a fellow of the Aspen Global Leadership Network. You're welcome, ma. Up next, we have a representative from Multilateral, the World Bank. Very happy to have him, Dr. Samuel Mata. Dr. Mata is based in Abuja and has been covering Nigeria since 2021 as part of the economic policy team at the World Bank. Previously, he contributed to various analytical studies and operational projects across the Middle East and Africa. He holds a PhD in economics from the University of Nottingham, and his research has been published in several peer-reviewed journals. Dr. Mata, you're welcome. Our next panelist is joining us online via Zoom, Dr. Chinyere Almona, who is the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Dr. Almona has over 30 years of experience in corporate governance, risk management, and compliance across the private sector and international development institutions. She previously led the Africa Corporate Governance Program at the International Finance Corporation as the IFC, supporting governance reforms across 13 African countries. Dr. Almona holds a specialist MBA in corporate social responsibility from Nottingham University, UK, and a doctorate in business administration from Business School, Netherlands. She's a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, that's ICANN, and the Institute of Management Consultants. A warm round of applause to her as well. Last and certainly not least, Dr. Hussaini Abdu, who is a country director of CARE International. Dr. Abdu is a public intellectual and international development expert with over 25 years of experience in governance, humanitarian leadership, and institutional reform across Africa, Asia, and the Americas. He currently serves as country director of CARE International in Nigeria. Previously served as country director of Plan International and Action Aid in Nigeria, and led Action Aid International's democracy and governance program across more than 20 African countries, working with continental and multilateral institutions, including the African Union and ECOWAS. He holds a PhD in political science and chairs the board of IAGA Africa and Partners with Africa. Welcome.
these were monies that companies, businesses had paid into the central bank on a forward contract, and the central bank had not been able to honor for over a year at some point, over 2 years at some point. So you can imagine the loss of credibility, loss of confidence in an economy that had taken money in, and the central bank itself was a defaulting institution. So already internationally, we could not get into a number of rooms. We could not even speak because there's no one that you're going to call to invest into your economy when you already have a $7 billion hole that you need to fill before you start paying out. So everybody was deterred from coming. So we had to fix that. And so we looked at what's the composition of these backlogs. And we took a commitment that we would pay every single one of them. The president took that, and the central bank government took that. Now, when we started paying in November, we then had a meeting with all the CEOs of the banks to talk about, look, we're going to, and some of them said, look, some of these liabilities, there are questions as to how they emerged. And some of those questions were, we then had to put up, later on, a team led by Deloitte to come and say, let's audit this $7 billion first. Because there's no way we can dip into the reserves, $7 billion into something that is questionable. And so Deloitte did an extensive piece of work, and some of the things that emerged were issues around, a lot of governance issues around how those backlogs themselves emerged. Fast forward, we were able to pay out about $4.5 billion. $2.5 billion was deemed illegitimate, more or less, because of the processes by which they came in. So we settled that, and that brought a lot of confidence back, and then started taking a number of measures to see how do we improve FX inflow into the Nigerian economy. And so we worked a lot with the fiscal side. I'm sure my sister Sayede will talk a little bit about that. But the first issue with Nigeria is we've always been Nigeria's an oil economy, right? This is where we get our highest inflow. But prior to 2023 ending, the oil sector had been contracting for almost 2.5 years, right? If you look at oil sector GDP, it was in the negative consistently, and the oil sector had really reached a breaking point in 2023, right? So, and this was because of the unsustainable subsidies that were there and the lack of production in the refineries, and we all know the story. So we had to work a lot with NNPC into what's the reform plan to ensure that we get to an expansion of FX revenue. Now, if you take a look at 2012, Nigeria 2012, we made $92 billion from the oil sector. Fast forward 2023, we made less than 2. So you can imagine the delta, right? What had happened over the years. Now this on the oil sector. FDI, if you look at FDI, another source of FX inflow, had consistently been tanking for the last 10 years. And the reason is clear. You have 3 or 4 exchange rate policies. You bring in your money at X, you can't take it out at Y. Your money is trapped. Nobody's going to bring money. So that was another issue. Foreign portfolio investment had also crashed because, of course, nobody's going to bring his money into an economy where they can't take a decision to take it out tomorrow. So that had also crashed. Non-oil exports had also crashed. Cocoa, we made about $2 billion in cocoa in 2015, 14, around that. But by the time we came to 2023, that had crashed as well to less than 300 million or something like that. So everything was really, really bad. So we had to do a lot of work on how do we open every single source of this. And this is a lot of the work that was happening at the back end. Now, for these things to flow, we had to allow the currency to adjust, right, to become the shock absorber. Reserves when we came in were at less than $1 billion. Net reserves. The rest of it that you saw, the 32 billion, was monies that were borrowed on swaps and other sorts of contracts that were not owned by the federal government of Nigeria, were not owned by the Central Bank of Nigeria. So really what we were worth as an economy of 200 and more million people, was $800 million. There is no way an economy like that can move. And so the work over the last 2.5 years has been to correct all of these distortions. Now, I came in at the middle of the presentation. I mean, I think it's important. It's a very good presentation, by the way, but I think one thing that we also need to realize is hindsight is always 20/20, right? When you're looking backwards, you can see how very neatly you need to have placed every single piece of the puzzle. But when we are in the heat of the reform, it's almost impossible to do that. You can always think, okay, year one, we're going to take off 30% of the FX subsidy. Half of the year, we're going to take off half of the petroleum subsidy. And then you continue like that. But you remember when you have a child and he falls down and he's all bleeding and everything, and you take him to the hospital and they put the bandage on the leg, right? And you come back home, you don't return to the hospital to remove half of the bandage the first day, half of the bandage the second day, so we were really in a crisis situation. And I think that it's important that people understand really how bad things were, because when we take ourselves, we imagine that we had a choice in a lot of these reforms. We really did not. We really did not. We were placed in front of a situation with a train coming at us, and you had a choice to either move out of the way, take the right decisions, however painful they may be, and then correct. Now, where are we today? We're at a position where inflation has been declining over the last 19 months. Food inflation is at the lowest it's been in 13 years. We're at single digits for food inflation. We are heading to single digit inflation, which hasn't happened in the last 12 years. Okay, so that is one of the biggest contributions to the poor, when you can allow them to say we can get food at prices that are not changing rapidly, that are low enough for us to be able to afford. That's a pro-poor measure already. Where are we in terms of FX? When we came in, the net reserves were at 800 million. Today we're at $32 billion. We're an economy that is inspiring confidence everywhere we go. And frequently, when we go to DC with colleagues from the fiscal side, we make a presentation just to a room like this with investors. And there is no better investable destination. We're among the top 3 in terms of emerging market economies, right? Before, we were competing with the likes of Egypt, Kenya. But today, when you sit with portfolio investors, they rank Nigeria consistently high. And that's why when you see issues like, for example, what happened last week with the war, over the last 2 weeks, you still see that capital continues to flow into the economy because, of course, the rates are good. There's a lot of confidence in the economy. So we've rebuilt that section. If you look at the news consistently today around oil sector, you will see all the work that's being done by Ministry of Finance, the presidency itself, on unlocking all the latent assets that have gone dormant. And this is a significant amount of inflow back to us. If you look at non-oil exports, we're back to the highest we've been in the last 10 years. Yesterday, we had a meeting with the Export Promotion Council, and we made $6 billion, I believe, last year from non-oil exports, and that is going higher. We have a target for 12 billion, and then we move on from there. Our balance of payments are looking good. The Purchasing Managers Index for February, which is an index that tracks how businesses are putting in their money in hiring new equipment, in hiring new people, and expanding inventory, has been at its highest for the last 10 years. It's at 56 index points. So where we are today is an economy that is transiting to a positive. We're not yet there by any stretch of imagination. We still have significant challenges, especially on the social front, which is places where we need to take action. But we are an economy that has turned the corner away from the imbalances that we met and on a strong footing towards progress.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that. Sanyade Okoli, as the Deputy Governor just mentioned, oil prices are, back to triple digits. Crude oil back at $100 per barrel, and I think this is, well timed for you to talk about the why, why the fuel subsidies were removed, because if you remember, during those times, there were queues everywhere, right? And thankfully, there are no queues now, even though prices are high. So from your end, on the fiscal side, can you talk about the need to do that? I guess also acknowledging the impact on prices for everyday Nigerians, why it had to be done.
Thank you. How long do I have? So we just know upfront.
couple minutes. Just I know the deputy governor had to express what was going on, so he went a bit over time. So, but yeah, just a couple minutes if you can.
You're not going to limit me to 2. All right. So, good morning, all, and thank you very much to Agora for having us all here today. To your point, Mohammed has covered a lot of ground, and what I will do is to just try and bring some color into some areas. So if we think about it, Mr. President came in with a renewed hope agenda. And if you boil it down, it really was about making the lives of Nigerians better. But then if you go back to where we were, and April 2023, I was actually privileged enough to be part of the transition team that went to DC for the World Bank IMF spring meetings. And as we engaged with different parties, the multilaterals, bilateral partners, portfolio investors, etc., the message was very clear. They were, presentations, data upon data, showing the impact that these subsidies, both fuel and FX subsidies, were having on the economy. And data showing the counterfactual that if we continued in this direction, where we would end up. And if you think about it, if we say we're trying to make the lives of Nigerians better, a key part of that is having inclusive economic growth. But you're not going to get inclusive economic growth without investment, because you know that government alone cannot, inject the amount of funding required to get this growth. And therefore, to be able to attract this investment, you need an attractive macro economy. And as I said, go back to April 2023, as you're engaging with different, FDIs, everybody, the message was clear. Until you address these 2 big elephants in the room, we're not going to engage. And so we came back from that April, and as Mohammed has said, work did go on behind the scenes, just digging deeper, understanding the fuel subsidy, getting a good sense of how much of that fuel subsidy was funding our neighbors. Because if you remember, there was a lot of smuggling happening at the moment, and getting a better understanding of, let's just say, how much of that subsidy was not benefiting Nigerians. So that by the time Mr. President came on May 29, work had been done, and it was clear to everybody that for such reforms, you needed to do it when your political capital is high. It's not after, you've been going on, like you're not going to remove subsidies today, right? It's just being very practical. Thus, the subsidy is gone on day 1. But then, the economy is not linear. It's very complex. And there are many levers you're pulling at the same time, just because you're trying to steer forward. So we're removing fuel subsidy, but we also removed FX subsidy. In removing FX subsidy, of course, the Naira depreciated. We were importing PMS, which means that the landing cost of petrol went up. But then, Mr. President was conscious of the impact that removing the fuel subsidy had already had on Nigerians. So when Naira is depreciating, we couldn't then just start raising the PMS prices further, which meant that an FX differential started building up. Because everybody, you'll be in December 2023 or early 2024, people are saying, for some reason, okay. Okay. But in reality, you were not having that savings because the naira had depreciated and the landing cost had gone up. And so it was on the 2nd of October 2024 when the Dangote oil refinery finally came on stream that fuel subsidy that had started building again was once and for all eliminated. But again, from a fiscal side, you've got to remember that the only way you're going to move the economy forward is if there's the monetary and fiscal working in tandem and accommodating each other. So that as the monetary side are trying to bring FX stability and bring down inflation, they're increasing the interest rates. Government is a significant borrower, which meant that whereas when we came into government, interest rates were we were borrowing about 8%, it went up to 24% and started coming down. Also, when you look at the debt, because a lot of people, they looked at how the debt numbers had gone up, and like, you're borrowing, no. A large chunk of that came from also the external debt. If Naira goes from, say, 420 as it was, and at some point peaked to 1900, but let's say now we're at 1400, by the time you convert that external debt in Naira terms, the debt went up. But the focus we've had is to try and get that fiscal stability. We know where we're trying to get to, as I said, just generally inclusive and sustainable growth that makes the lives of Nigerians better. And there's a level of fiscal stability that must be in place for us to achieve that. And that really is the day-to-day work. DGEP, as we refer to him, he's also comes to the economic management team working on that. And I should also use this opportunity to say on Tuesday, they met looking at the Middle Eastern crisis to really dimension what this means for Nigeria and what steps we need to take. And I will pause here because I have...
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, so we've heard from the monetary and fiscal side, right? Now we're going to hear from the private sector. Dr. Chinyere, I hope you're with us. I think I see you on screen there. And okay, Dr. Chinyere, you've heard the why from the monetary and fiscal representatives of the monetary and fiscal authorities of Nigeria. You are, of course, just once again Director General, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. What is your take, Dr. Chinyere, in terms of what you've heard, the why this was done, the reaction of the private sector, and how things worked out from that period, Doctor? So make sure your mic is on. Can
you hear me now?
Yes, go right ahead, please.
Oh, thank you very much. Good morning to everyone listening, and good morning to my fellow panelists. I didn't quite hear the beginning of the conversation, but I did hear the closing part of what Dr. Mohammed said, and Sanya there as well. First of all, let me say thank you to Agora Policy for this opportunity and for the very insightful presentation on the highlight of the study on the impact of the reforms. At the private sector level, the recent macroeconomic reforms have affected businesses in different ways. So let's even look at the positives, and I think Sayande and Dr. Abzai have talked about the positives on these things, and I believe that when you put together the petrol subsidy removal, the exchange rates liberalization, monetary tightening, and electricity tariff adjustments, these have been have put a lot of pressure on the private sector. While on the positive side, the monetary and the fiscal side, it has corrected some major fiscal and market distortions that we've experienced for years. And over the years, the Chamber of Commerce, we have constantly advocated for the removal of the fuel subsidy because we didn't think that it represented sufficient benefit to the Nigerian people. Like Sunday alluded to, in some ways we are funding our neighbors and giving some. So removing the fuel subsidy, estimates have given the an average of 7.5 billion. Of the resources that government can actually redirect or should redirect to infrastructure and human capital investment. Now, for me, at the private sector, that's what we want to see. We want to see that the savings from the fuel subsidy removal is funding infrastructure. Today, the private sector is still struggling with a bit of that because there has been a huge adjustment cost, of course. So in 2022, the fuel price was about 200. Suddenly it went on to about 1,000, and then now with all the crisis in the world, it's over 1,000. This represents direct costs to businesses. So for businesses that will have to generate their own power, and a lot of businesses are constantly generating their own power, that's a huge cost for them. Almost like between 40 and 50% of a business cost will be power. And if we believe that the savings from just the fuel subsidy removal should go into infrastructure, we want to see that is actually elevating some of the pressure on the private sector, but that hasn't been, that we're not seeing. So at the macro level, they've talked about the balance of payment improving, they've talked about the foreign reserve improving, and the fact that there's a lot of confidence now in the Nigerian economy. I agree. So the economy is growing, but that hasn't trickled down to the common man. That hasn't trickled down sufficiently to the businesses, particularly the small businesses, because their operating margin has over the years been, compressed. And in all of this, you also have that the consumer demand is reducing because of all what we have talked about. So with the fuel price going up, transportation is more difficult and more costly. And so businesses and the consumers are struggling. So what we want to see, while these macro reforms are great, and I commend the government for having the courage to put these reforms into motion, what we needed to have will be complementary policies that could support or cushion the pressure. So for instance, when we had the fuel subsidy removal, we're expecting to see certain policies to support the private sector. There were talks about cash transfers, there were talks about credit to small businesses, but even those, it was difficult to track, to monitor, to know where those funds were going to. So there seemed to have been an uneven transmission across sectors. And this tells us that, there has to be a way for government to put in place certain things that can help. I mean, when we talk about SMEs, we can consider discretionary rate for SMEs. So while the CBN keeps interest rate high, we can, think of how can we support the SMEs a bit more. There's the National Credit Company that's supposed to help the SMEs, but then that even that hasn't, the mechanics of that, we haven't worked it out properly. So for me, the reform is good at the macro level, but we want productivity. We want productivity enhancing reforms by government that will help the private sector to scale, to expand, to employ more people, and to ensure that the private sector is thriving. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chinwe. Dr. Abdul, I saw you taking notes, and I really like the work that you do over at CARE. You are on your website. It says we are focused on reducing poverty and taking care of the vulnerable. So I really want to hear your thoughts on this. But Doctor, I don't want to throw something in here. I admit to everyone I have a decentralization bias, right? I just want to give you a quick example when you talk about it, because I know there's been a lot of focus on the federal. With what's been happening with fuel prices, we were talking to our correspondents in different parts of the country. Kaduna State has disbursed CNG buses to try to help residents deal with the fuel prices. River State has not, right? So in terms of your review on how these reforms have impacted the vulnerable, are you looking at this at the state level, or are you taking this at the federal level? Do share your thoughts, please, on the reforms, the why, and how they've impacted folks.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Is this here? Yeah. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Agora, for inviting us to be part of this conversation. And it's quite an interesting one. And I appreciate the context that has been established by the teacher and the Deputy Central Bank Governor. I think this is quite illuminating for a lot of people, but it's a conversation that we are all very much conversant with. I think my take on this discussion, I'll try not to get to respond to some of those issues, but to appreciate that, one, I don't think an average Nigerian or anyone is questioning the economics of this reform per se. But I think what we question is the politics and the social cost of the reform. The economic logic established, it makes sense to a number of people, on anyone who has followed the economic trajectory of this country in the last few years. We appreciate this. And secondly, for a country that has been perpetually under reform, the language of necessity of the reform does not make any difference. Nigeria has been under reform since 1986. We went through structural adjustment program, and the language has always been there is no alternative to it. Anyone who followed Nigeria's economic trajectory, you will appreciate that. In 86, the structural 85, 86, the structural adjustment debate was massive. The discourse on foreign exchange, what we call the second-tier foreign exchange program, was massive. The concern for some of us is that, and I'm not a military apologist, but I just have to lay this on the table, that if a military government could go through that process of robust conversations and even take a position to say, oh no, we're no longer interested in the loan because Nigerians say they don't want it. Forget about the fact that they went through the back door and still introduced the same policy they wanted to have done because the policies were inspired by the IMF and the World Bank. And we went through it. And since then, we have gone through different phases of deepening that neoliberal reform that we ignited in 1986. So the language of how the imperative of it, why we don't have alternative, it's the same all over through our history. It's been the same line of argument. And the argument that, okay, look, he gave us a medical approach to this. We can't remove bandages every day. But I also know that in medicine, you don't also provide medication on once and for all basis. That is why you have dosage. They say take 2 in the morning, take 2 in the afternoon, take 2 tablets in the evening. Because they recognize in that medical terms that once you overdose, it's a problem. And the challenge we are dealing with today is the overdose. And it is this overdose that is killing people. Look, I'm a political economist. I don't have problem with all the details in terms of the macroeconomic necessity and the stress that informed that. But I have a problem with spontaneity in decision making. That the government can wake up on the day that the president is being sworn in and declare that we have removed subsidy and then we are liberalizing the foreign exchange. That, for me, yes, he could have the political capital at that moment, and therefore it is important to do it. But you see, capital, like anything, you gain it, you lose it. That's what it is. You may have it at that moment of decision making, but you can lose it through that simple pronouncement, and therefore makes implementation extremely difficult. And that's the issue. So for us, and for a country that was already stressed, because all the failures of the central bank, I accept those things happen. Everybody knows this. All the crises that happened under the past government, it was very clear. But it wasn't the citizens of this country that caused the problem. It was government. It was government's problem. So why are you punishing me for what the government failed? Because government is government. You are government, the past ones are government. So why are you punishing us for what for government's own failure? For what they ought to have done rightly and are not doing it. Your corrective measures are necessary. They are important, and I don't want to question it. But how we carried out those corrective measures are the key concern. One, you live in a country where over 130 million people live under multidimensional poverty. Then, you are also in a country that is highly import dependent. So first instance, you remove subsidy without any safeguard. It is the first time this was done in the history of this country. I don't want to say the previous safeguards were excellent. They weren't. There were problems, there were challenges with them, but there was a pretension that we actually want to have certain safeguards. There was no safeguard, and that's what informed the differential implementations that you see. You gave example of Kaduna, you gave example of Rivers. That's what informs those differences, because there is no coherent safeguard. It is only in Nigeria that we talk about social protection post-mortem. That you have the shock before you put up social protection. The social protection that I do, that I understand, that I've engaged with globally, is basically a mechanism that you put in place to avoid shocks. You don't do that or shock. And this is not about this government. Even previous government have done it that same way. It's not, so I'm not saying it's this government. Even previous government, that's what they do. You create the shock, and then post-mortem, then you now say, we are providing relief, we are cushioning it. So I think this is the social part, is the politics of it. Because many times, we think reforms are technocratic processes. So we go through this over-technicization of reforms. But reforms are about people. They are about society. And that is why the involvement of people is very important. But we have reached a stage in this country where we think that people have become obstacles. The people are obstacles. If you listen to them, then you're not going to do anything. That's the dimension, and that's what informs this kind of thing. Or if you listen to labor union, they can be obstructive. And I agree to some extent. Because again, the labor union also didn't take through the thought processes that are required to engage. They are my friends. And I know I disagree on so many fronts in some of our conversation. Civil society, yes, you may have your own understanding. You may think that they are quite obstructive, and I agree. Because we are all layered in the society to perform different roles. And you know, each of us, as we perform our roles, we become obstructive to each other. And that is why social negotiations are very important. Government, the way it does its things affects me. The way civil society do their things affects government. The way labor. So, and that is why conversations are always important for you to find. Because the challenge of reform is not the decision. The challenge of reform is sustaining it. And this is the history that we have had, and that is why we couldn't get through with any reform. I tell you. Today, we have these stories about how bad it was and what we have changed. I've lived in this country all my life, even when I was doing international job. I most time operate from here. I've studied this country. The longest you will have of this government is 8 years. Another person will come back and will be told how bad it was and why we need to do this. So for me, and I think that sometimes, because if you roll out all the gains, the macroeconomic stability that we talk about, despite the micro shocks that we have, that was shared with us earlier, and that we all know, the foreign investors that are coming into the country, fantastic. But many times our policies, particularly in the economic front, are designed to secure validation from somewhere else. Is World Bank happy with us? Is the IMF happy with us? When we go to spring meetings, how many people are coming to us? These are the kind of validations that sometimes we go seeking, because we live in a world that is so deeply divided. The northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. At all time, we are looking for validation, even in my own space. So I am not talking about economic, even at the level of civil society. Sometimes we seek validation from the northern world, unfortunately. And this is what happens in this regard. So when investors troop in, my basic economics also tells me that there is an incentive. There is something attractive, because capital, the whole essence of capital is profit, and it will go anywhere to make profit. It will go to Iraq under war, it is in Sudan, it's still making profit. As long as profit can be made, capital will go there. And so, if the investors are coming, there must be incentive. There is something attracting them. Could it also be that we have subsidized the poor and subsidizing the rich, and that is why they are coming, and that's why they are making profit? I hold it here. Thank you very much.
Dr. Abdul, you did not disappoint. Thank you. That's the reason why. That's the reason why you're on this panel. Thank you for bringing that angle to it. So, well, Dr. Martha, you're with the World Bank, and you're going to have to, I guess, respond to some of these points that have been put forward. The World Bank did advocate for the subsidy removal. Dr. Abdul referred back to the SAPUDO, that was kind of the IMF, but still. So, look, I guess, if you wish to respond to some of those points, from your perspective, the why this was necessary.
Yeah, thanks so much, and thanks for the invitation. Let me put it, I would say, two numbers, which I think one of them the GEP mentioned. So net reserves was $700 million, and I remember, or $800 million in mid-2023. And I remember we were at some point in a conference in the central bank, and I was making the point that Nigeria was on the brink of collapsing. And I remember the governor corrected me, Nigeria was in the collapse. So that's the first number. The second number, debt service to revenues. And here I'm talking because I think in Nigeria, when people talk about government, people tend to refer to the federal government. I'm talking to the entire federation. Debt service to revenues in 2022, it was 102%, meaning that for every 1 naira collected, you need to borrow to pay it back. So in a way, I think there is a lot of analogies on, on hospitals and the health sector. So I think at that time, Nigeria was, if kind of take that analogy, you have a patient who was in full cancer. So we're trying to give him chemotherapy, and that will not work, right? And I guess the counterfactual was, if nothing was done, Nigeria could have gone to Sri Lanka. And the case of Sri Lanka is clear. So I remember we had colleagues there. When you don't have don't have reserves, you cannot import, right? And in Q1 2023, so you had the famous Naira redesign, you had the elections, and you had the subsidies. I remember there was a journal article, and I will not forget it. So Nigeria had 3 queues. So had the queues for petrol, so had the queues to get cash, and had a queue to get the ID cards for the. So I think that it was a really bad situation. Now, I think we can all agree or, discuss whether the sequencing was right, whether, it was gradual or not. I'm in the view, personally, I don't think it would have been gradual, because when you're in a cancer, if you give, 2 doses of medicine, it will not help. You really need to do shock therapy, and I think that was needed. And I think the question is whether it was sequenced or not, we can discuss, because effectively, as it was mentioned, the big reforms were done in 2024. So I think the time between mid-2023 and when the reforms were done, what could argue that whether, back then the monetary policy could have been faster to react? Yes. One could have argued that why the subsidy lasted for another few months? Yes. But I think we all agree that that should have been done. I'm personally, I don't think a gradual approach would have worked. I think what could have potentially, and I agree, I think maybe when these decisions were made, ideally, and again, that's in an ideal scenario, you would need to have the social protection already in place. So when these policies are done, the cash goes directly to people rather than wait a few months. And I think that's something that I guess needs to be, I would say, improved upon in the future. Now, I guess in that context, and I think there is a context of also whether these policies have contributed to poverty or not. I guess I will put it back to the counterfactual. So first is the PMS subsidy. All the empirical evidence was saying that the PMS subsidy was going to the rich, not the poor, right? So the poor don't have, they don't have cars to finance, to get petrol. So it was basically going to the rich people who have the big SUVs, who have big electricity at their home, etc. So I guess the second point I want to make is, as a country now, right? So, and obviously it's not for the bank to say anything, right? It's a choice. I think the question is how to kind of make sure that inflation goes down. Because, and I agree with the GEP, is that the biggest now tax on the poor is to get that inflation down. And I hear a lot of the narrative is that, okay, inflation is now to 15%, so we should celebrate. I agree it's good to get it down to 15%, but that's still double digit. And, double digit inflation means your poverty it could potentially decline because it's on a high base, but it could decline very slowly, and I think that's the challenge. So I think the first challenge kind of going forward is how to make sure that inflation continues to go down, and hopefully it reaches single digit. I think that should be really good, and at the same time to kind of change, I would say, or accelerate that growth. 4% is good compared to the historical, but if you look at it per capita, with a population of 2.5% growth, it's still, it's I would say moderate, but it needs to go to 5, 6, 7% to have that growth faster. And the composition of that growth, I think, should also evolve towards more jobs, job-creating sectors, which are mainly, I would say, agriculture, industry, and to some extent services. But I would say mainly agriculture. This is where, if you want to lift people out of the poverty, that's where it should go. So again, kind of in summary, I think the shock therapy was needed. Whether it was, I think the sequencing could have been improved. I guess the answer would be, kind of yes, but at the heart of, when the boat is on fire, or sorry, when the boat is sinking, okay, so I think the choices there are how to stabilize the situation, and then at some point how to make sure that when you kind of do this shock therapy, which will have, I would say, negative implications, I think this is where I agree that the social protection should have been faster to kind of kick in to mitigate the impact on the poor and vulnerable.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mata. I can't believe we only have 10 minutes left. I mean, I thought we had like a multitude of questions for you all. And I think we have to get the audience involved. So perhaps with the last few minutes that we have, because I have another round of questions. I think by the time we go through it all, we might, did you want to touch on something? Yeah, you wanted to respond? if we, okay, very quickly, please go ahead.
All right, no, so thank you very much, Doctor. And I think the first thing I'd say is that we were responding to the question asked, which was the why. So it's not that we just wanted to rehash, but really the question was the why. Now let me start by saying what I know we did not do well. I think one of our biggest failings was the communication side. It is something that, and even kudos to WAS, you know, in the early days we were having lots of conversations, and we know that off the bat, we really should have come out more strongly with, on the communication side to say what we're doing, why we're doing it, etc., etc. Was it that we're looking for validation? No, and I hope that did not come across. What I was saying is, as you engage with everybody, and we came and did our own work, you know, Mohammed is talking about all the empirical data. Samara will tell you that certainly Sayade is not, you know, we do as a Nigerian government what we think we need to do, and sometimes with the multilateral partners we have some very robust discussions. But what did we do? Let me speak about the social protection, because I know that that's an area. It hasn't gone as well as we'd like. And I like to cast our minds back. We did start. But come December, I think it was December 2024 or 2023, we realized that money was going out. But it was not going out the way we thought it should and who we thought it should be going to. So we then had to pull back. And even as we're engaging, trying to improve the system, let's just say somebody gave us wisdom and realized there are three parameters: speed, scale, and accuracy. And that in reality, as much as you want to get all three done, realistically, you could only achieve two of them. So you then have to step back. Which are the ones that are sacrosanct? Scale is sacrosanct. You say you're trying to get to 15 million households. So you need something that gives you the scale. You also know that accuracy is key, because if you're not getting the money to the right people. So unfortunately, speed did get compromised. And what we then did was to try and move to digitization, trying to get NIN, et cetera, et cetera. But let's remember that even government, we're operating within the parameters that we all operate in with Nigeria. But I think the most important thing to say is what I know is on the minds of the president, the economic management team, so much of the government is, how do we get these gains from the macro? Even we are tired of just talking about the macro. Everybody in this room, everybody across Nigeria, they should feel the difference. So the sectors that we've been trying to focus on to really get it to come down is the agricultural sector, for example, the power sector, and so all the effort. But as with many things, unfortunately, even for us in government, I don't know about you, we should have this conversation, it's been somewhat disappointing at how slow it is, but that's the reality of so many things. So you're pushing and you're pushing hard, but because you're pushing uphill with lots of resistance, it's not going as fast as you can, but you just have to ensure that you stay focused on where you're trying to go and you keep pushing. And I'm going to pause here.
Fair enough. Okay, the executive director has just given us a bit more time. And to your point, look, just to point out, agriculture grew 4% in Q4, right? So I was doing sub 1% since that time, and it was a standout. But what's next? I think that is very quickly, because I still want to get the audience involved so they can answer it. But I'm just going to go down the line through everyone here. So we've talked about the why. We've talked about the impact on people. So what's next, Deputy Governor? From the monetary side, are you, how are you going to get reserves up further? What's next in your view?
Thank you very much. I mean, I think that we've left a crisis period, right? And crisis in every sense of the word. And I think we're now at a place where we have fragile stability. Fragile stability in the sense that we must not take it for granted that this is durable, right? It's something that we have to work on every single day to even maintain the stability that we have today and get to a new place of a new normal that's much better, right? This is from the macroeconomic side. Our foreign exchange market is stable, it's transparent, it's ethical. Whether you know the central bank governor or the deputy governor or not, if you want FX as a business today, you can get FX. That asymmetry of information is secured. As much as possible, inflation is trending downwards, has been. We want to get to single digit in a way that businesses can plan, households can have reduced costs, and all of that. And we're doing now, so the next level of work really for us is as much as possible to be able to maintain the stability in a way that allows true, broad-based, inclusive growth to happen. Now, why is this important? The pathway to incomes and improvement in the livelihoods of Nigerians is through jobs, right, and incomes, right? And the way to get jobs and incomes is to an economy that is growing, where industries are expanding, where there's hiring, where there's improved remuneration, where there's expanded economic opportunity. For us at the central bank, the work that we're doing, for example, at the banking sector recapitalization, is exactly to be able to have banks that have the capital that can support businesses. This is from the commercial side. And then to be able to build out the development finance side in a way that banks in that sector can also support small and medium scale enterprises with low digit interest rates and all that stuff. The high rates that we have today are a response to the shock, but it's not something that we see continuing for a much longer time, especially when we are able to get consistent lowering inflation. I don't think it's working, is it? Is it? Okay. All right. So I think for us really the next level is how do we prepare, how do we continue to support the fiscal side, the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Trade and Investment, Ministry of Budget, Ministry of Agriculture, to be able to build out the sectors that deliver growth in a way that includes all Nigerians, Ministry of Housing and all of that stuff. Now, we've cured a number of things, right? The FX situation is okay. Inflation is coming down. But more importantly, I think that
So more importantly, I think that there is a lot of confidence in the economy today. Now, one of the indices that I mentioned at the last part of my intervention was the PMI. Now, while GDP growth shows you where the economy has been in the last quarter, the Purchasing Managers Index shows you where it's going. And for the last 15 months, what it has shown us consistently is that industry is expanding, that businesses are hiring. We're not at the level that you see mass scale, but we need to get there. Now, we need to be able to, one of the speakers, I think Dr. Abdu mentioned that we're an import-dependent economy. That is not, we used to be, but we're not an independent economy anymore. If you look at the breakdown for our balance of payments today, for example, for the last 2 years, we've been in balance of payments surplus. What that means is that we are exporting. Our income from exports is higher than our income from the payments that we make in imports. This is where we need to be, and this is where we need to expand. Our balance of payments surplus for 2024 was $6 billion, which means net around the world we made $6 billion. For 2025, and the figures are just about to be released, we still are in surplus. Now, this is where we need to continue to get to, and that's where the economies in the world that have been emerging and have actually emerged rather than remaining a potential have continued to be. So we are correcting this and trying to make sure that we give this economy the best opportunity that it has had. There are significantly higher incomes today, and I saw my brother Sheon from Budget. We had a program here a couple of months ago where we dissected the incomes that are now going to subnational governments. Now, it is very important to see that with the delta that has changed in terms of the incomes that are going to subnational, a lot of the social intervention programs that Dr. Abdul talks about needs to be situated at that level. The federal government is not equipped. Even when it wants to do so, it has to do it with the state governments. So they are the best equipped to be at the forefront of that. Where we set at Central Bank, for example, in the past, the Central Bank tried to go into everything that is being talked about. Central Bank was the Ministry of Aviation, it was the Ministry of Power, it was the Ministry of Sports, it was the Ministry of Agriculture, because collectively within the Central Bank, we had intervention funds that were higher than any of the ministries that were charged with these things. And it was because of the frustration of, let's go and fix things. What happened? We ended up with 33 trillion naira of printed money, right, that fueled inflation. We ended up not achieving any of the goals that we set out to achieve. So we've been there before. This economy has tested and tried so many things. But what is true and what is happening today is that we are doing things and they are working. What we need to do is to sustain them, do them better, and then be able to get to that last mile of how do we improve the life of the ordinary Nigerian much faster. Thank you very much.
So speaking of improving the lives of the ordinary Nigerian, so in addition to the social protection program, just to remind ourselves that, we now have things like NEL Fund that's helping with the education. There's the CNG initiative, and Mr. President just announced an extension bringing in more kit. There's the Credit Corps that's making access to credit easier and more affordable. But from a fiscal standpoint, really the focus is on improving revenues, but in a way that does not hurt the economy. Because if all you're doing is pushing to just get more revenue now, but then businesses are suffering and citizens are suffering, then you're not on a sustainable path. So in the immediate term, there's the implementation of the new tax acts, and with that, the National Tax Implementation Committee is also working. We've learned from some of our past mistakes, embarking on some significant stakeholder engagement across the country so people understand. In fact, I should use an example of my assistant and secretary running into my office the other day, where the secretary had realized that the tax she was paying now was actually less, but not enough people talk about it. So just having a smoother tax system, but one where we can improve the level of compliance. And we've got the executive order on the flows from NNPC, so that more of the oil income is coming directly to federal government. There's the national single window, which is coming on later this month, which essentially makes it easier at the ports for importers and exporters. And that is not just good from a Nigerian fiscal standpoint, but from a trade standpoint, and therefore, job standpoint, an economic standpoint. So really pushing on those different areas. But then, as I said, trying to make the economy as attractive as possible. And it's not just for foreign investors. It has to be for domestic investors, because in truth, foreign investors look first to see what the locals are doing. If Nigerians don't believe in the Nigerian economy, then why should foreigners come? But there are things that we need to do to achieve that. There's the continued push for further macroeconomic stability, because that's what capital goes to, where it makes sense, where the risk-adjusted returns are attractive. So push on that. We know that our policies and governance frameworks, we need to keep smoothing them out and making sure that, again, it's attractive for investors. The infrastructure, there's the work on the roads. I've spoken about the electricity. I'm hoping in the last few weeks and months you've been seeing work done in the electricity sector to make this. There were some distortions within the sector. Huge debts in different parts, address that. There's the digital infrastructure, because we're such a young population. So there's the Project Bridge, the 90,000 kilometers of fiber, so different pieces like that. And then also working to improve the access to finance for businesses, both large and small scale businesses, both equity and debt, because you need to essentially do the work so the engine of the Nigerian economy will turn fast enough and turn wide enough so that the individuals really feel it, not just in their pockets, but in their lives.
Thank you for that. Dr. Chinyere, I wanted to get you in as well. You're for the private sector. We've talked, Sayende Okole was just talking about the need for domestic investors to believe in the economy, indigenous folks, and so the private sector, who better than that? So from your perspective, Dr. Chinyere, what needs to happen next in terms of trying to boost the private sector and getting more investment from there and creating more jobs?
Thank you very much. And yes, the points you have made are kind of real great points. For me, it's really important to continue the implementation trajectory, because sometimes we start implementation and we make these very commendable statements about all the things that we have put in place, but then there isn't sufficient execution power down the line. There isn't sufficient tracking or monitoring of what people are doing. For instance, you talked about credit. The Nigerian Credit Guarantee Company was launched many months ago. We haven't really heard anything. We haven't really seen how it's affecting the economy, or how it is, who is giving credit to, or how it's expanding in the private sector capacity for production. So some of these things, they're nice, and we have a lot of reforms and a lot of policies, and I do agree with you that they are great. But implementation, tracking, making sure that implementation is faster, because if it takes you 10 years to deliver something that you're supposed to deliver in 1 year, then it is meaningless for the Nigerian people. So that's where we are, that some things are so slow that we're not feeling any impact at all, and we really want to feel the impact. When people talk about power, so you keep saying, that have we seen that things have improved? I haven't seen anything improve. National grid has collapsed so many times. In Lagos, there's no light. In most part of Nigeria, there's no light. I was with, we had a session at the chamber with Tanzania. We had a Nigeria-Tanzania business forum, and they were telling us how they are almost like 24 hours on power. Also, there's smaller economy, yes, but we have been on this matter for too long. On this same power issue, I was listening to somebody in the power sector recently, and she was describing how even the small power that we generate, we can't transmit. Why is the TCN in government hands and nothing is moving from there? Some things can be privatized so that the private sector can take it on and work on it, so that it will be efficient. So government sits on some of these things, and we talk about the nice policies, but we're not feeling it. We're not feeling it in the private sector. So things need to change. I think sometimes also just holding somebody accountable and making it public will help. I heard the CBN deputy governor talking about the backlog earlier, and the fact that we had them 2.5 billion, and they were, they had question marks. Do you know that at the time this whole thing was going on, there was no communication? So which one had question mark more than the other? What were the issues? If you say that there was collusion between private sector and the perhaps CBN officials, was anybody held accountable? Were that repercussions? No. So you say, that some things had question marks, but nobody knew anything. There were no details. So sometimes government will make all these assertions, but back to the private sector. If you don't get a private sector that is productive, you can't move the economy forward. And there's no way you can be productive in darkness. So we need to have the power aspect fixed, and fixed quickly, so that the private sector can then begin to expand. The CBN deputy governor talked about, the private sector is expanding, they're employing people. They expand and employing people, but can you imagine if they expand and employing people at 10% when they have the capacity to do it at 150%? So you can't sit and say, they're employing people, but the gap between what we are doing and what we can do is so huge. So it's important for us on the private sector side, we have the right infrastructure to work, to expand. We have access to credit that is so critical, particularly for small businesses. We need to give them concessionary rates so that they can begin to produce. We're talking about intra-Africa trade. How do we participate competitively in intra-Africa trade if we can't even produce at a reasonable cost? We talk about Nigeria First policy. How do we even fill the needs, the demand, if we can't produce properly and efficiently? So it's important, really, that some of these policies and reforms that we have put in place, that there's a proper tracking mechanism, and that there's a reporting line. We can see it online, we can see it on the internet, that who is producing, who is not doing what they're supposed to do, how is this thing moving. We need to see an implementation track. That's what we don't see. So we announce all these fantastic things, but we don't know who is doing what. We don't know how fast they're doing it. We don't know what the indicators are in terms of milestones. So it's important, from our private sector perspective, that implementation happens quickly, that it translates to the common man. Reforms are great, but reforms will only be meaningful if it can affect the common man, if it can help the private sector to expand without bearing too much cost. There's a lot of cost pressure on the private sector, and once we always want to say Nigeria is doing well, but if the profit margins are so thin, it is very difficult to be able to make that claim very confidently. And of course, the foreign investors are looking to the domestic investors to see how we are faring. And so if we are struggling, then we can say all these nice things, but it's not going to work if they look in and the Nigerian businesses are overburdened by all lack of infrastructure, and we are still saying, they're in place, they are being worked upon, but there isn't a lot of impact. So I'll stop there for now, but I just know that all the things that we have talked about, if we get it going quickly, things will go well. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I hope I don't jinx anything. Last time I was on this stage, the power went out while we're on, so hopefully it doesn't go out. It hasn't gone out since we've been on stage. Dr. Chinyere, thank you for that. Dr. Abdul, so what do you want to see next? And be as honest as possible. Tell us what next steps.
That sounds like I have a history of dishonesty. Okay, thank you. We live in a country where we speak from both sides of our mouth, and so in one breath, Nigerians, we want a proper federal system. They want to have a very empowered state government, more resources to state government. In another breath, we don't trust the state authorities, we don't trust local government. We think the federal government is much more trustworthy, and therefore we want to see federal government doing certain things. And that can be very problematic for policymakers, particularly at the center. For me, for instance, I have questioned in several ways why a member of the National Assembly will take resources from the center constituency project and go and build primary schools, put street lights, build toilet, fence cemeteries and graveyards. And that is not the responsibility of the federal government. You are in the federal parliament. So it's like you are stealing from the federal government to do local government and state government responsibility. The same way some of us were very critical of the role that the central bank was playing, where the central bank, like the teacher described, was practically every ministry that you can think about, providing different forms of interventions everywhere, and through that process helping themselves to resources that are actually meant for ordinary people. I'm happy to hear that that has stopped, and that's quite encouraging. But when it comes to issues bordering on social protection, we actually think that there can be a standard national framework that is institutionalized. It may not, and I agree, the central government may not have the capacity to, meaning technical capacity and the human resource to go into that. I think the state government should be doing it, the local government should be doing it. In all of my experience around the world, it's done at that level. But there is a national framework that defines it, so that Kaduna will not do it and Rivers fails to do, or Kano does it and Niger refused to do. There has to be that national framework. Because we don't have it, what we are getting from the state government is that more resources has come to them. It's more money in their pocket. And what do they do with it? Overhead bridges, airports, you know, and some of those egocentric projects, and that will end up becoming white elephants that have no value to the people. Okay, take for instance, Zamfara State is building an airport. Zamfara is about 200 kilometers from Sokoto. Jigawa has an airport in Dutse. That airport, I am not sure any, apart from chartered plane, I'm not sure any commercial plane had landed there. It's about 12 years since the construction. Bauchi has an airport. Gombe has an airport. How many planes goes to Bauchi? So you have some of those things, and that's what they do. You go to any state capital today, what you see is overhead bridge, underpasses, because development has been defined that your capital city must look like Abuja. Then when you have that, then you are now a developed state. Your state is fine. Forget about the fact that it also creates opportunities for other things. I think that will be my first call, that let's institutionalize our social protection program. Let's be very systematic about it. Let's support state government. I mean, when I say let's, the federal government support state government to build out mechanisms. And can we also be able to say what percentage of our resources are we investing in social protection? That will really, really help. And that we will not be doing post-mortem. We'll be continuing. And people cannot be on social protection forever. People graduate, and new people fall in, because it's more like a shock absorber kind of thing. The second part for me is our policy should be socially aware. And let me give you an instance. In this country, only 7% of us are formally employed, according to Nigeria's labor survey. 93% of employed Nigerians are in the informal sector. 93. So when you make policies that have to do with salaries, you are probably dealing with, or minimum wage and all that, you're probably dealing with that 7%. And the 93% that is in the informal space, and we know when we say that space is informal, it comes with a number of difficulties, including assessment. And therefore, interventions that we do must take strong cognizance of the character of our economy. The third for me is, look, macroeconomic stability is good, and I don't want to question that in any way. We all want to see GDP growth and all that. And I commend those who are involved in this process of arriving at where we probably are at this moment. But experience also tells me that it is not enough for a stable society. And that areas and countries around the world where they've been able to deal with poverty, they were able to create a deliberate process of working hand in hand between stabilizing the economy and ensuring that people live decently. And I don't want to start mentioning countries. The Chinese experience is massive. And the role of the state remains very important. What kills some of us in technocratic fixes is the belief that the private sector is important or more important than the state. And therefore, what the state needs to do is to provide the right framework for them to operate, and therefore things will work well, and then it begin to percolate, and the poor will benefit, probably in his graves or so. And for me, it doesn't work, and it never worked. It never worked. Across Africa, I have seen examples of many. Ghana was one time celebrated as an example of stable economy. And when we were resisting all the structural adjustment program in those days, Ghana was often given to us as an example. Ivory Coast before the Civil War we were told is one of the most stable. And it became an example for every African country. At the point, Kenya, and today is still an example. But I walk in some of those places and you get the narratives around it. And this is why I took a personal decision that I will not comment on any country, whether the economy is doing well or not, whether it is Burkina Faso that you hear every day. Or no, but I want to hear directly from the citizens, because sometimes what we get, the documentation, the analysis we get from the World Bank does not reflect, and the African Development Bank does not reflect the realities of the people. Because the World Bank, the African Development Bank, they have their standard framework for understanding economies. And the reporting and analysis are based on those bases. And that does not speak to the contextual issues of those countries, and we don't get the right call. So for me, and lastly, I think our population is massive as a country. And our economy must go along that line. We have a youthful population, and what we always say is that if we invest in them, they become asset to the country. We don't invest, they become liability to the country. There are lots that we can do to support that. Social development is very key. Health and education. I know we talk about agric all the time, and I like the idea of investing in agriculture. But health and education remains very key. That's not the job for the central bank per se. Madam, it's key, and we need to find the way of doing it. Fortunately and unfortunately for us, by the nature of our constitution, is a concurrent responsibility. The states play and local government plays very important role. That's my space. But I know what the challenges are at the state and the local government level. What do we do? What can we do as a country? Because if we don't deal with our education and health crisis, I'm sorry, we cannot even improve the economy in the sustained manner, because economy is about sustainability. It's not an episodic issue that you do today, because this is how we have been doing it. We do it, we fix this today, tomorrow we tweak, the next day we go. If we can't sustain it, even though I don't talk sustainability the way the World Bank sees it, in one of its reports, it says that we must keep these changes for the next 15 to 20 years, then we will now begin to see how it will impact. I don't want to die before I see improvement. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Audu. Okay, Dr. Mata, you're up. I mean, you've been here since, what, 2021, right? So I would assume you've been on the ground, doing surveys, talking to Nigerians, but please go ahead. What's next? What's next?
Yeah, thanks so much. No, I think what's next is to kind of make sure, I think the North Star would be to kind of reduce poverty, right? So I think that's should be the direction. And now if you go from there, I think there should be two key focus points. So one of them is to keep the fight against inflation, because again, I think that's the main tax on the poor. And the second one is how to get that growth higher. Now, on the second one, on how there should be two kind of pillars. So the first one is how to get the public sector in Nigeria, or the state, play its role in ensuring the state would finance where the private sector would not come in when it comes to public goods. And here specifically we're talking about obviously security, human capital. And human capital means education, health, and social protection. Now for that to happen, you need two recipes for it. So one, you need first money, right? And we all know that revenues in Nigeria, I think the good thing, and I guess the untold story, is that revenues have increased a lot. So as a ratio of GDP, they went like, we can agree on the numbers, but they went from like 5 to 10% in few years, and this is really good, but it's still very low. So I think the first task is to kind of continue to kind of get that revenues higher. And at the same time, and I totally agree, I think there is a discussion on how to kind of spend better. And on that one, I think the work of the fiscal is harder than the work of the central bank, for a simple reason, is that you have one central bank, but practically you have one federal government, 36 states plus FCT, and 778, I think, local governments. So I guess the question how to kind of get all the fiscal entities working together, especially that, and currently in Nigeria, the states are spending more than the federal government. And I think this is where I guess that discussion should happen, how the states should use these kind of revenue gains. One is to increase their own revenues too, because I think that's important. And two is how to spend it better. So I think that's I would say on human capital, which I totally agree. So I think this is the part on the public sector. But at the same time, I think the public sector should also put the policies to enable the private sector to come in, because even if you spend 20-30% of GDP, the public sector will not be enough. I mean, we need the huge needs of the of Nigeria, roads, infrastructure, power, etc. And the public sector cannot go in everywhere. And I think this is where the public sector should enable the policies, and this is mainly kind of on trade, and I think the national single is one example, on power, on access to finance, on digitalization. So kind of some of these sectors which will unlock the private sector to come in, where the public sector, the resources are better used in areas where the private sector cannot come in. So I think this kind of makes, again, it's a big agenda, but I think it's a long-term agenda that if all the building pieces are put together, I think we kind of see kind of that grows higher, and then hopefully that poverty kind of goes down faster in the future.
Thank you so much for that. I have to check with our executive director. How many are we taking? 3? Can we take? It's a lot of hands popping. Okay. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so sets of 3, and please, I know no comments. You just wanted to, we're talking about the economy here. So the lady in yellow, that's his one. Okay, we're going to start with our professors in the front first. So yes, the gentleman right there. Thank you, sir. Please introduce yourself and direct your question.
My name is Eze Onyebere. I run the Center for Social Justice. When you talk about harmonizing fiscal and monetary policy and using it to grow the economy, you are reforming. How do you reform and grow the economy when you make budgets and simply refuse to implement them without offering any reasons why you did so? I would also like to be enlightened Why you have your MPR at about 26 or thereabout, and people are going to the banks to get money at 35 or thereabout, and you are telling us concretely your inflation is about 14 or 15. This corridor, and if you put money into a bank, all right, you will never get anything beyond 10, 12%. So definitely you are punished for keeping your money in the bank. Now, these figures being banded, 35 if you go to the bank to borrow, 12% if you put your money, your MPR at 26 or 27. Can we make sense of them and reconcile them? Thank you.
Ms. Remy Ayede from the University of Ibadan. Can you explain to us how you hope to sustain reform if people are not held to account for bad behavior in government?
We have to take a lady next, please. The lady in yellow, she had her hand up. No, sorry, I'm so sorry. The lady in yellow behind, thank you.
I'm Nasiba Aliyu. So I wanted to know how we're going to use the windfall from the current Iranian war. How are we going to invest that in such a way that it reflects in the real economy? And then how are we going to use the monetary policy to cover any inflation that's going to arise from that?
Okay, so I think we'll take those first, get answers to those. You didn't direct your questions at anyone in particular, but okay, so it's the both of you. Okay, so I think you got the good questions, yeah? All right, so whichever one of you wants to go first.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Onyekperi. Thank you very much. I've been reading you for 10 years, so it's a pleasure to meet you. I think I'll take the one on the MPR versus the savings rate versus lending rate and all of that stuff. So as I mentioned in my intervention, the MPR is a temporary tool which we're using to curb inflation. And if you go through monetary policy, the tools that we have are limited. Sorry, photographer, I'd like to. So is MPR, CRR, the liquidity ratio, and a few other measures that we have, like the FX market and everything. So with regards to the MPR, if you look at what's happened in the past, typically for you to be able to control liquidity and for you to be able to tame inflation, your MPR has to be higher than the rate of your inflation. And that is your positive real rates, right? Now, positive real rates are important because when your inflation is higher than your MPR, it means that every money you put in the bank, the value is being eroded away on a daily basis. So let's imagine that you put 100,000 naira in any bank today. And let's say, hypothetically, inflation is at 15%, MPR is at 5%, hypothetically. By the time you come back at the end of the year, the value of your 100,000 would be significantly eroded, right? Now that's one channel. The second one is that when investors are making an investment decision, they look at your inflation and MPR differential, your positive real rates. For all the economies that have negative real rates, investment does not flow. Why? Because when they bring in their money, for every day their money is here, it is depleting in value. So you have to achieve positive real rates. Now, for almost 2 decades in Nigeria, a long time, our real rates were negative. Now, this accounts for one of the reasons why you can see that the curve for investment was going down for over a 10-year period. So we had to achieve positive real rates, right? And that's why you saw the consistent move in the MPR to get to above inflation. Now we've now gotten to above inflation, and now you're talking about why the wide differential. So the second thing we then have to look at is, okay, if one of our objectives is to attract investment, who are we competing with in this space? So in sub-Saharan Africa, we're competing with the likes of Egypt, Kenya, South Africa, Ghana. So if you look at the differential, for example, in these economies, because when I'm a trader sitting on a desk in London or in New York, what I'm looking at are these metrics. Where am I going to take $100 million today, on Monday? Where do I take $1 billion tomorrow? And what makes the difference is where these flows are. Now, these flows are important because every day in Nigeria today, right, our market used to turn over $200 million per day. Today we're turning over almost $3 to $4 billion sometimes. Last week, three days ago, we did about $1.5 billion, right? Now this brings the liquidity to the market. It's about how the FX goes in and out without central bank needing to intervene or deplete our reserves. So these things all circle back. Do we envisage that this is going to go on for much longer? No. As the disinflation trajectory continues, the MPR cuts will also follow. What the MPC, the Monetary Policy Committee, tries to do is to follow data. It's very unemotional. It's not about whose friend has collected a loan. It's very unemotional. What does the data say? What do other economies globally, what are they doing? Now, if you look at the market expectation, for example, from the last MPR, there was an expectation that there will be a significant cut. But part of the data that was reviewed by the MPC, which many times is not public, are some of the uncertainties in the global economy. Now, did we know there was going to be an Iran war? We didn't. But now that it has happened, it has justified the cautious easing. Why? Because if you look at Turkey, last week, Turkey spent $12 billion to defend its currency because of the outflows from the war. Turkey spent $12 billion. Okay? Now, we have, in the opposite, yesterday and day before, have seen actually more inflows coming in. Because as investors are flying to safety, they're going to jurisdictions where the returns are still high. And one of those jurisdictions is Nigeria. And when these funds flow in, they stop the currency from moving negatively against us. And so while you saw a short depreciation, I think at the end of last week, we've now seen from yesterday, day before, an appreciation. And it's because of these flows. And it's tied to this. So while we continue, the world is a very, very dynamic place today, very challenging. We have 2 or 3 shocks that we're expecting this year. We have the elections, and you know how that goes with a lot of liquidity. We have to be very careful regarding how inflation goes. And then we have the US, which has become a major pole of uncertainty. And then now we have this war. And people think that I'll just take your question so that, Sayani can take over. We've sat down with our colleagues to really look at all the potential impacts, positive and negative, emerging around this war. Part of the impacts, of course, are a fiscal windfall, right? We did our budget at X dollars a barrel. Oil is now much higher, right? So that differential, we're expecting it, right? We're hoping for it, and hopefully when it comes, then the fiscal has a question of what do you do with it? I'll wait for Chinese to answer. But you see, it also has a negative. The negative is you have shipping routes that are closed that also carry significant amounts of trade, both from Nigeria in terms of export and to Nigeria in terms of imports, for example, fertilizer, right? So there is a risk of upswings to inflation because of these supply chain disruptions. So we have to look at net, where do we fall as an economy, and be able to sit down together with the fiscal side in terms of that collaboration that Mr. Irenki talked about, and see what is the best way to position this economy. How do we ensure that we are trapping all the gains and as much as possible avoiding the negatives? And I can tell you these are the things that are keeping us awake at night every single day. Thank you very much.
So as Mohammed just said, we're not operating in a silo. There's so many other things happening. So if we take, for example, the 2025 budget, We know that the budget assumptions for oil price was 75 and production was 2.06 million barrels a day. In reality, the production was on average roughly about 1.6 million. And oil price, we've spoken about the US effect Trump. We all remember what happened last year when, Liberation Day and tariffs and what that did to oil price. So I say all that to say that there was, in terms of the expectations of cash inflows, oil revenues did suffer. But thankfully, non-oil revenues did quite well. But you've got to remember, federal government, basically there's federation revenue and federal government revenue. And federal government gets about 52% of oil revenues, but a lot less of non-oil revenues. So when the oil revenues, there's a shortfall, we suffer disproportionately compared to states. And so if you've got a shortfall in inflow, you have to look at how you spend that money, because there's a limit to how much you can borrow. One, because there's a limit in the budget, and therefore the whole appropriation law. But two, also from a debt sustainability standpoint. You can't just say, oh, I have a shortfall of, take a figure, 5 trillion, so let me run and borrow 5 trillion to be able to spend. That would be fiscally irresponsible. So we had to ensure that there was prioritization in terms of how we spend. For example, wages and salaries are a very high priority. And when we talk about budget implementation, especially capital, because I know that's very topical now, two things for us to remember is that in 2025, throughout the year, we were also spending on 2024 capex from that one pot. And two, there are two aspects of capital investment. There's the ones through the MDAs, but also the ones through project-tied loans from multilateral funding partners. And they continue, according to the 2025. So really, that's the answer to the budget implementation question. I'm conscious of the time.
Thank you for that. Okay, another 3 questions. I think this gentleman. Okay, let's have the lady in front here. Where's our microphone? Cecily, we're going to get to you. Promise, we will get to you.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Abdul Halim Ishaq Ringim. I work with the Kaduna State government, and I think I would have to restate the question regarding the Iranian war. Because
do you have a question?
Yes.
Okay. We're pressed for time. Sunday Okoli has to leave. So
I don't think it has been answered.
Who's your question directed to?
The government representatives. So I don't think it has been answered. There's the windfall, but then the Iranian war and the entire issue has the potential of also eroding the disinflationary trend that we're currently going through, and then the inflation that we're talking about. So how is the monetary and fiscal side of government hoping to curb the menace of the ripple effects of the Iranian war?
Okay, so the ripple effects of the war. 2 more, or rather, yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Damilola Balajobi. I'm a professor of political science and also the political settlement researcher for African City Research Consortium. I want to appreciate Professor Dr. Abdul for your intervention about politics, and I want to ask Mrs. Okoli, sorry, how do we do political visible interventions that everybody can win? Because most of the things we are talking about, in reality, the people at the informal settlement, they're not actually benefiting from some of these reforms. So what do you think we can do, especially because we know that government changes regularly? That's questions for you, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Okay. I think you need to clarify your question one more time.
I mean, I'm talking about the politics of reform.
The politics of reform.
Yes.
Okay.
How do we ensure that we do reform that people, especially at the local level, benefit?
Okay, so everybody feels. All right.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't want the people in the back to riot, so we gotta have a microphone, please. There was the gentleman whose arm is longer than everybody else's. That him right there, yes. Let's get him in the back. Please introduce yourself, sir, and your question. And please direct your question.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Kuram Bulatife. I intern in Microsoft Nigeria. My question will be for the hope of the common and for the youth, I'm a young person, what is really the hope and how does this policy reform, how does it actualize to the young people? A young person trying to start life. There's a lot of, the price of cutting alone will make you stay back in your parents' house. So like, what is the hope for we and how do these reforms come to us in better experience? Thank you so much.
It looks like the two of you are going to get all the questions today. Okay, let's have those. Did you catch his question on the? Okay, so those are the next set.
Thank you so much.
No. Sorry, that's the first three. We'll come to you in just a moment. Yeah. We're gonna. Maybe she'll hold on to the mic.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, before I answer him, I just saw one of my economics teachers in the. So can we give a round of applause for Professor Muntaka, please?
Stand up, sir. Go ahead. You're recognized.
So any downside to the reform that CBN is doing is his fault.
We should blame him.
Professor Salamat is also here from ABU, so thank you very much for all the intellectual background. Yes, my brother. I think, he asked about the war and how the effects of that are being handled from monetary and fiscal side, I believe. And I think I started to answer that in the first part of the questions. I think, we sat, when was it? Yesterday, Tuesday, right? With the Minister of Finance, Coordinating Minister of the Economy as part of the economic management team to really try to dissect this. And I think the Minister even gave an interview yesterday regarding this, parts of this issue. It's a developing situation, as you know. We are monitoring it very, very closely. We've had scenarios done regarding how long, if it's a 3 to 4 week war, what are the impacts on us? If it goes on beyond that, what are the impacts? All the way to an extreme scenario, right, where it's long drawn and all of that. And we've sort of had policy options for every single one of those things. So we are prepared as we can be to ensure that we get the gains, because we're not also assuming that these gains will come automatic, right? Or we're not assuming also that we can avoid the fallouts automatically. It is a developing situation. I don't think any economy today can tell you for certain what exactly is going to happen. So that's why the scenarios are there to build out from least case to worst case. Now, how prepared are we? I think we're much better prepared today than we have been in the last 10 years, right? We're much better prepared. Why? Firstly, I think that the stability that we have achieved, there are some things that are, as I said in the beginning, it's fragile stability, and this is one of the reasons why it's fragile. However, we have a system now where we think, within Central Bank, we have early warning signals. There's a team that's focusing on that every single day. If this had happened 3 years ago, when we had $800 million of reserves, it would have been economic collapse, for sure, right? Today, it has happened where we have $50 billion plus of reserves. We have $34 billion of reserve that is fully ours, organically built. So we are ready to be able to step in and smooth the market as much as possible. We have a system today with the fiscal where, the Minister of Agriculture was part of the economic management team. We're looking at supply lines for various products, household consumptions, so we've looked at it very, very deeply. Of course, we can't go into the details, but what I can assure you is that we are ready, we are preparing to be better as much as possible, and we're hoping, because it's not just the economic impact of the war, but we're also very, very concerned about the lives that are being lost today around the world, the properties that are being destroyed, economies that are being destroyed around the world. Many of people that we work with, if we call them today, they are the people that are facing. So this is not some theoretical war. These are people that we know and we work with, people that you meet when you go to international forum that are going through this. So it's not only for us to also look at and say, how does Nigeria benefit, but also to be empathetic enough to say, this should stop as soon as possible. but also while we're asking for that, we also have to be as prepared as we can be.
Thank you for that. Sonia, did you want to take the youth question, or did you want to?
They're both wrapped.
Okay.
What everybody is saying, including Doctor, is we've heard everything you've said, big picture, the macro. But how does that affect the individual Nigerian? We have seen our lives become, and the data is there. It's not hard. You go to the market. I go to the shops, and then you see the price, you want to shout, and then you remember your job title, and you keep quiet, and you keep it moving. So it is real.
I do go to the market, but I think it's very easy sometimes to assume, the government, they don't really care. Nobody in Nigeria, and including the president, every single Nigerian, at least from my metric, is at least one cousin away from poverty. So if you don't see it in your own house, you see it very next door. So I can assure you, none of us is immune to what is happening. Right? We could be in situations today where we have the honor to be able to serve the country, but we're also very, very mindful that this thing can change tomorrow. And it will be somebody from within the audience, and we'll be sitting here and going through the same thing. So I just want to assure you that we are not immune. We fully feel this, and we are as frustrated. Of course, sometimes we can't come out and say the things that we want to, but we are as frustrated as about the speed, about being able to implement this social. If it's up to me, I'll employ every single Nigerian, make sure you have incomes that are respectable. But it's just not that, and it's a process that we just unfortunately, have to follow.
So let's take it down from line. People need jobs. People need not just access to food and electricity, but it needs to be at an affordable level, because just having power that I can't afford, and I'm having to turn off all my lights, even turn off my fridge, it doesn't help. So we completely get that. But what we're trying to say is that for us to have, okay, let's take the electricity sector. You need it produced, you need enough of it produced, you need it to go through the transmission system, you then need to get it to the discos before it goes to our homes and businesses. And there are challenges across the entire value chain. So you're having to do work across, at the GENCO level. And so what I was talking about was, I'm keeping it real. It's not that we now see a lot more electricity, but whereas the GENCO levels, they were owed a significant amount of money. Federal government issued a 1 trillion naira bond to begin to bring that down. So the economics makes sense for them. On the transmission side, even this week, we're working with one of our development partners to release funding that has been secured to address some of the transmission issues. Yesterday, we were talking about work on the disco. So you're having to attack it, all at the same time. And unfortunately, these things are just a bit slower. In fact, one of the questions I asked, and they shall remain nameless, but a development partner yesterday, is it always this slow? Or is it just Nigeria? And we were told that actually, that over the last couple of years, from when we develop a program, you design the program, then you get the board approval, and that, the whole thing before the cash gets into the system, before the lines are built, et cetera, and they're saying, globally, it is generally a slow process, and Nigeria, in the last couple of years, we've even made progress. Food security from the COVID time. I don't know how, I can't remember what I was reading. That made me realize food security, I was not in government then. Food security should be a concern for everyone. And then the Russia-Ukraine war, et cetera, it became clear that actually, it is indeed, we're talking about the current war, it affects fertilizers. it affects urea. So these were some of the conversations the agric minister was talking about on Tuesday. You know, and sometimes as you're sitting in the room, you even get a better sense of how these things, you know, something I hadn't thought about was irrigation pumps based on petrol. So that when the petrol price goes up, it even affects the farmer to that level. So essentially, I'm saying that, you know, you've spoken about the human capital. It's not at all lost without, you know, health and education. You can't be talking about economic growth if you're not investing in health, if you're not investing in education, because you will not get sustainable growth. But it's a hydra-headed monster that you're trying to attack all the different things at the same time, and you keep pushing. But the good thing is there's greater prioritization, knowing the things that matter the most to people now, and ensuring that we're spending as much of not just time, but the resources pushing on those areas. And that will create the jobs for the youth, and not just jobs, but the opportunities. Because when there's electricity, even if a young person cannot get a job, but there are different businesses they'll be able to start with a fiber network. Think of what that does. We know where the world, you know, it's not just has gone, but is going in terms of digitization, etc. With that fiber network, we'll create, you know, tremendous opportunities. And I know it's frustrating. I know it feels slower than everybody wants, but I implore you, honestly, just take some comfort from the fact that people, they know, you know, the North Star. They recognize the North Star, and they are pushing and pushing forward. And we cannot relent. We've all come too far. We had a conversation on Tuesday when somebody mentioned something that seemed to be going back, and I was like, we cannot. It's like Nigeria has come too far for us to turn back. We just have to keep pushing.
Thank you so much for that. And I just have to say this, for those of you who are seeing Sayende Okoli as a government person, Google Sayende Okoli Arise News. She's been a regular on my show for the past 4 or 5 years just to get her views on what's been happening in the private sector before, of course, and she got very consistent, I can promise you that. We've got...
It's not that easy, I now know. I repent, government.
Great interviews. Look, we are an hour over time, and I want to give, okay, the young lady there in the, yes, she's standing up. Okay, yes, she was the one that was about to ask a question, and we took the mic away from her. So your name, please. And please be very, very brief and specific in your question. They have to leave. Our panelists have to leave.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. My name is Dr. Olukemi Akimushere. I'm a comrade on one side. I'm an economist at fellowship level, chartered accountant at fellowship level, management consultant at fellowship level. So I don't know where I'm going.
Please give a round of applause to your question, please.
So now, this is my former country director, Dr. Hussein Abdu. That's why I said I'm a comrade on one side. My question is very practical. All the analyses, I'm even part of some of the engagements at some level, but we have a big problem, insecurity, that we are not tying to economics. And I expected us to really talk about it here. I have a client who is into agric, and
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Okay, so insecurity. Okay,
so
we have
insecurity,
to get yes. Okay.
Roads. Now, if you want to go and farm and they kidnap you, you are not sure you will come back alive. How do we do it? Insecurity.
Perfect. Insecurity. Okay. This gentleman in the red T-shirt, he's been waving over and over at the back. The gentleman at the back. No. Okay. Sorry. What's going? Okay. Okay. This lady here. Okay.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone.
Yes.
My name is Winifred
Yes.
Igbose. So my question is, first of all, they talked about access
Your question.
to
You got to get to your
credit.
question. Yes. What is your question?
I have two questions. They talked about
We're only going to
access
take one. We're taking one question. You have to make it as specific as possible.
Okay, so my question is, I founded a network of female business owners, and then what I do is I made sure, because I discovered that
You have to get to your question.
yeah, so that it will be clear.
Yes.
Sorry. So I discovered that there's a huge problem with electricity, especially because, you know, women-led businesses, most of them have to do with electricity. So And buying power is not so cheap. So I had to come up with a system where these women can access power cheaper, in terms of them putting money together and then putting solar in their businesses. I had to come up with that initiative. So my question is now, how do we get support in terms of partnerships so that more women can benefit from things like this?
Thank you so much. Our final question, final one.
Hold on.
He came to the front. The gentleman in the red t-shirt came all the way to the front to ask his question. Okay, Okay.
Yeah, my question is, my name is Omar Yakubu. My question is, I've heard a lot about financialization, macroeconomics, I've not heard anything about industrialization, because those things are supposed to lead to industrialization. So to any of the panel members, thank you.
My name is Samuel Akpan, and I write for Per Second News. My question is very simple. Price control. If you go to Pape markets, if you go to Karo markets, if you go to Nyanya markets, the price of ugu is different. If you go to Benue State, my friend brings in yam from Benue State. It passes through over 12 checkpoints.
Sir, are you saying that we should bring in price controls? Is that your question? Price controls. Government should control prices.
What is the government doing for price control, number one? Okay. Number two, what the organization in charge of price control, we need to know them today, please. Thank you very much.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much. That's it. I think we'll never leave. Okay, final question. I know. Just
yes, final. Thank you. Thank you to the panelists. I think they've done quite a lot in the area of the interrogations. My name is Dr. Asongwa Henry from University of Nigeria, Nsukka, Department of Economics. First, I want to ask this question. The last administration did quite a lot in the area of looking at the laws that can, unbundling the laws that has to do with energy, making sure that the state can also be part of the concurrent list when it comes to energy. My question is, since you all speak to the government, is there a way you can put more pressure on the federal government to interrogate the state government at different levels more, to see how they can be part of the energy problem in solving that issue? That could also reduce unemployment and create more opportunities for the young people in the rural communities and at the state level. And two, like someone talked about price control, what is the role of the government in also putting pressure on different regulatory agencies that can monitor a lot of things going on in Nigeria? Because until we address those areas, then we can't actually regain confidence from the people. So the government need to interrogate a lot in the area of regulatory agencies controlling prices across different boards, so that this can also have effect on the things we aim.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much. So, weren't fuel subsidies price controls? Wasn't that what that was? And who wants to go first on the price controls and electricity, please?
Thank you very much. I think just on the frustrations with the price gouging from different suppliers, I think the agency that you are asking for is the Consumer Protection Council, which has that responsibility to ensure that prices are not overly exorbitant. And it's not about price control, it's just about how do you stop price gouging. So you might want to write to that agency, and I've seen them taking action, including in Abuja last year. They took some action. So Federal Consumer Protection Council is the one with that responsibility. In terms of states and power, that reform was done, and I believe that in the last, I was in some meeting where they were talking about 2 states that have made significant progress. They've set up the regulatory agency in the state, and they're doing things. I think Abia was one. That's right. And I think 1 or 2 others are doing Lagos, and I think there's another one as well. So there's some movement there, but I'm sure if you put together the right stakeholders, you'll be able to get, I don't want to mislead you, into thinking that. But I think what is also emerging, maybe for Waz, if he's here, Agora policy is really the importance of a conversation also with the subnationals, right? To state governments, because a lot of these reforms as well translate to, especially when you come to the social protection side, really what the states are doing. I think it's very important to do that. The federal can set the framework, can give some incentives, can put in some money, but I think a lot of the work needs to be at that state level. I think those are the questions that I can.
So we might not have used the word industrialization, but if you listen to a lot of what we said, we're talking about creating jobs. That really it comes from industrialization. We're talking about investment. We're talking about the need to put in place the necessary infrastructure. So I say all that to say, without a doubt, industrialization has got to be a key part of what we're trying to do. And they launched something, I think, last month. Yes, exactly, the National Industrial Policy. So I'm pushing forward with that. I think the only thing I will add is, doctors said that sometimes we are all guilty of speaking from two sides of our mouths. Whereas on one side we're saying that we should respect federalism, and then on the other side we say no, federal government should be more dominant. Another example is, just earlier this week, somebody said to me as, PMS prices were going up and the whole crisis, is like government should not do price control. And then you come here and it's like, you must do price control. With some of these things, we have to step back and say overall, not just in the short term, but in the mid to long term, what is best. And my own general philosophy is less government interventions per se, no meddling. As much as possible, you want the markets to work. Sometimes it needs some curbing, yes. But then if we're speaking honestly with ourselves, when we talk about price gouging, we have to ask ourselves, why do we do that to each other? That's not government. Why do we as individual Nigerian citizens, just are opportunistic and sometimes, cause pain to our other brothers and sisters?
Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for our panelists. Dr. Abdullahi, Sayedi Okoli, Dr. Abdul, Dr. Mata, and of course Dr. Almona on our Zoom. We're going to take pictures, and we're going to have just a set of pictures, and I think we're having the professors in the front row join us, as well as our executive director as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Sorry? Okay, sorry, they said they want to take only the panel members before. Okay. So this is the last item on the agenda, and it's my task to thank everyone. It's been 3 good hours well spent, and if anybody has said that discussing the economy is something that people will be so much interested in, and will be so robust as this, I will have argued. So I want to start by thanking all of you for coming and for being here, and I also want to thank the team from Next for having faith in us and for supporting us, for guiding us, and also the team from the British High Commission. And very grateful to the panelists and the moderator, Roti Sodiri, my sister Sonyade Okoli, Dr. Hussein Abdul, the Deputy Governor, Datijo, Sama Mata, and Dr. Chiri alumna. It's very important that we continue to have this kind of conversation, because reforms are very important, but they are about people, they have consequences, and like the chairman said, the chair of Agora Policy said, we need to, this is also part of what deepens democracy. So we should make conscious effort to continue to engage and to make sure that we listen to all sectors of society, all segments of society. So I want to thank you all over again. This is not the first time that we are going through reforms in this country. As Dr. Abdul mentioned, we went through an episode in 1985, 1986, up to like 1989 or so, the SAP reforms. Some of us are still living down that episode. And we had another episode in the 2000s. They were not as disruptive as the ones before then, and not as disruptive as the one before now. Things that you have to do. And today we have listened to different people, and people have deployed all kind of. Metaphors. Especially medical metaphors. The point I want to leave with is that Nigeria, whether we want to admit it or not, Nigeria was approaching a crisis. But because that crisis had not happened, so people are still open to making some arguing about whether it was real or not, and we can be talking about counterfactuals. But when you are in a crisis, that crisis can be apparent or can be hidden. So imagine somebody who is healthy, and since we're talking about medical metaphors, somebody very healthy walking into hospital to do their annual check, and they say, oh, by the way, there's something that we are bothered about. Can we run more tests? And they find out that the person has a life-threatening situation. So at that point in time, what do? Do you wait until it manifests, or do you address it? And how do you address it? There's no one way of doing this. You can do it in a gradualist way. You can do it in a big bang way. You never know what result you are going to get. But the fact of the matter is that when you have a patient, whether it's apparent or not, that comes up with something that is life-threatening, like somebody said, I think it was Sama that said Nigeria was approaching Sri Lanka, and in actual fact, we're approaching Sri Lanka. And for some of us who have lived so long, there was a time in this country that we were keen up to buy essential commodities. Nigeria was not too far from that. So when you have a situation like that, what do? The first task is stabilization. You have to make sure that you stabilize the patient. But stabilizing the patient, as other people have said, is not enough. You also need to bring the patient to good health. And also the fact that reforms have to be done does not mean that any way you do them is okay. So what I'm taking away from this is that, yes, there's a consensus that the reforms are necessary, but there are also some concerns about how the way the government approach it, and lessons that we can learn from that, even when hindsight is 2020. And we need to pay more attention to certain things about making sure that the social disruption that will happen, we anticipate them and we prepare for them, not just that, okay, we go just run them, let it happen, then we'll deal with it later. And government needs to communicate more. Government needs to carry the society